it's not a 7-hour story. So
Mine wasn't even a 7-minute story, let alone a 7-hour story. And you know what? I actually traced back because when I was editing those, because remember I had a month off coffee and I did
yeah,
zero caffeine for a month. And that was the first 2 weeks that I was back on coffee was when I started crapping on with those stories because I felt like I was on drugs again, for God's sake, when I was back on coffee those first two
it
weeks.
felt like 7 hours. It did
It
feel
did.
like
It
seven
did. It
hours,
was
but
they were a little bit drawn out. Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, welcome back to the Blokes podcast. Ryan Hassan from the Centre for Healing here, joined by Nick Sutherland from MindFit, and we have a very special guest today who we will introduce in a minute. We're very excited to talk to. But first, Nick has a story instead of me today.
no, it's not a story. It's just
Kick
it
back,
was an
everyone.
interesting
Sit
segue.
cross-legged on the ground. Listen to Uncle Nick tell his story.
I get my smoking jacket and my pipe out. I don't know why I went to Sean Connery then.
Yeah, I know you did.
It's not a story. It was just a nice little segue that Em and I went to her parents for dinner the other night, and it was a stepdad's birthday. Shout out to Ian if you're listening to this one, Ian. But he said something interesting. He goes, Nick, you and Ryan are very clever, and I was like, oh, okay, that's interesting. Where's this going? And he goes, I started listening to the podcast, and it was just two blokes talking and just talking about shit. And we were just telling me about your hamburger house and how it was just dripping on the chips and everything. That's the sort of stuff that we do for the first 5, 10, however long it's been, because it's just the whole purpose of this podcast was just you and I catching up, basically.
Mm-hmm.
So it was interesting to hear this bloke mention that, and he says, but the clever part is that you've already sucked us into the stories and then you start talking about the deeper stuff, so we're already hooked, we're already in the net,
Right.
and then you start
That's
talking about that deeper
unintentional,
stuff.
by the way.
Well, I said to him, thanks Ian, but I don't think I can claim that cleverness because it's completely unintentional.
It's
So
unintentional cleverness on our part.
yeah.
Yeah.
But it was just really interesting feedback because that's sort of that's how it all began, was just you and I catching up, having a chin wag, and maybe people will listen to it, maybe they won't.
Yeah. And today we're lucky enough to have a guest on. Nick, can you please introduce the wonderful Kristie to the audience?
Audience, meet the wonderful Kristie. Kristie, meet the wonderful audience.
Audience.
Yeah, so Kristie is a client of MindFit. She's in a 12-month program, and I wanted to invite Kristie on today because she's a huge fan of the podcast.
How clever of you, Nick.
I actually I do sell it to but
No, but it was more so because I think Kristie's a great example of someone who's reached out and asked for help, and we'll get her to tell that story later, but also of what can happen when you put the work in, as we keep talking about, right? So, Kristie recognised that her metaphorical garden was out of shape and needed some weeding, and she's jumped into that garden and really embraced the whole way of looking after it and tending to it. So I thought it'd be cool to get her on and just get some people out there that are listening that may be on the edge of reaching out and getting help with someone, or people, other clients that are sort of starting their journey in the program, to hear what can be achieved when you do the work. So yeah.
Awesome. I'm looking forward to this. Let's maybe kick off, Kristie, with how you actually found MindFit, because I believe you might have seen the MindFit Batmobile in the streets, and that's how it all started.
I did. I was driving down the highway one day and I saw this number plate and I thought, oh, what's this personalised number plate? Why can't they spell correctly? I had a whole story going on about this truck. And I went, MindFit. I thought, that's what I'm after. Like, that's perfect. Anyway, I thought, I'm not going to just jump into, I'd done a little bit of other work around this, over the years. And I thought, I'm not just going to jump into another thing where I'm just paying money and, So I Googled MindFit, and then the podcast came up. And I thought, I'll listen to that and see what this man's like, So I had a listen, and really immediately clicked with me. I stepped right out of the pit that I dug for myself, really. So yeah, I love the podcast. I just think it's such common sense, really. And, you cover so many different good topics. And, I know it's for men's mental health predominantly, but I think it applies to everybody.
Of course. Yeah, it's called Woke Blokes, but I mean, we all got mental health. We all got the same stuff kind of going on up here. But it's yeah. Yes, Nick, that's right. Did you have the issue like when you typed in MindFit into Google and Google's like, did you mean MindFit like with an I? Like you spelt it wrong? Yeah.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Had all of that.
Nick trying to be edgy, isn't it, Nick? Trying to be cool. No, we've been over this. Nick gets a bit funny when I talk about that.
I'm fine.
So Kristie, you've Googled, you've had a listen to the podcast, and obviously there was a point where you're like, okay, this is making sense. I'm gonna reach out to Nick.
It was the first episode, Hass.
Right.
That Kristie said it was immediate. It was that first episode. So, what do you remember? If you cast your mind back, if you leave the here and now, Kristie, jump in your time machine and go back in your memory and recall what it was exactly that sort of pulled you out of that pit that you spoke about.
I can't remember. I keep thinking I'm going to go back.
Okay, good chat. All right, thanks.
I can't remember exactly what it was, but it was just about not taking things personally. What other people do, is really never, ever about you. It's about them. And I thought I had done another sort of self-help course and things, which put me on track for a while, but there's no homework. There's no every day. It's sort of you do it and then it's done. And you sort of go back into bad habits, and I think and this is a little bit, MindFit's a little bit more, what can I say? I think it's a bit more polished than this other thing.
Yeah, I think I'll polish Nick over there. We use the gym analogy kind of thing. It's like, we can go to the gym and we can get in fantastic shape, but it's not like we just go, all right, I'm done now. And then we just stop going to the gym and everything. And then we find ourselves out of shape again in, whether it's 3 months, 6 months, 1 year. And like you said, a lot of those habits and mental health issues start to creep back in again.
And I think it was that you were both discussing, about, practicing daily exercise for your mental health as well as your physical health. I thought that's so sensible. And yeah, it really clicked with me. And I really did step right out of just immediately, how I was feeling, because I hadn't slept for years, about 6 years. I, had a bit of an adult tantrum, I suppose we'd call it, So, yeah.
And when you said you weren't sleeping, you were just getting bugger all sleep for that time?
Yeah, there was, I had a bit of a significant event in my life, and I just thought, just went into this kind of, really questioned my my own self-worth, and just I'd be awake all night, just be crying actually, quietly. My husband wouldn't know, but he used to know. He'd be like, he'd put his arm around me and whatever. But there was just nothing that I could do to change that thought process.
It's frustrating, isn't it? I've been there myself. And so you listened to the first episode and then reached out to Nick from there and booked in what do you got, Nick? The discovery session?
Yeah, I listened to a few episodes actually, and I got really hooked on it. And then I called Nick, and I think I'd listened to about 8 or 9 episodes, and then I thought, I'm going to go and do this, So yeah, that was good.
Yeah,
actually,
I remember you said you were binging on them, Kristie. You had to only allow yourself 2 or 3 a day, I think, at one stage.
Yes. Yeah, well, I was becoming a little bit dependent on it, actually.
We'll have to start a support group, Woke Blokes Anonymous. Limit your intake.
What Kristie was talking about earlier is really important, I think, in her coming into an understanding that, she had mental health and she tried some things. But I think the way that we frame it at MindFit was what resonated with Kristie, if my memory serves me correctly, because it was about that yeah, getting your mind in shape, and we constantly talk about cognitive distortions and how we get spaghetti brain, and I remember Kristie, the first session, the spaghetti brain was on full display, and she just had no capacity to self-manage or self-regulate or choose how she thought or felt or behaved. Even going to sleep was she couldn't. Most of us have the luxury of choosing to sort of fall asleep, where some people don't because the mind is racing or whatever. So she was stuck in these distortions, and it was pretty, from the luxury of my objective seat here, it was pretty easy to see what was going on. But as you know, Hess, and I know from firsthand, you can't see what's going on when you're in it. So basically, my role with clients is just to act as a mirror and reflect to clients what they're doing. And to Kristie's credit, she really took that well. She allowed that process to happen, and then I just ask them, how's this working for you? And if they say, well, it's not, okay, cool. Well, let's start making some changes. But it's not just let's talk about what's happening. It's let's actually, change this root cause, and but you've got to do so much work outside of these sessions, which, to Kristie's credit, she's really done. So
Yeah,
that's why
I
she's
really, I
here
really
today
want
talking to us.
Yeah, I really want to get to that, the work outside of sessions, because it's such an important point. But just a couple of things there, which I think are important as well, are a lot of people do get caught in the trap, whether they've done, a self-help program or gone and seen a psychologist or gone and had a shamanic healing or whatever it is. And then we kind of, get to the point where we're back in our old habits. And a lot of time we can just say, well, none of that stuff works for me. And we kind of throw therapy just in general out the window. And I think what you did, you were cautious in that, like when you saw the car and everything, and we're like, I'm not going to jump straight in, but I'm going to go and do a little bit of research. But you still had the I think the sense and everything to do a bit of your research and say, yes, I believe this is something that can help me, and take that step. Because I just think so many people they can have a negative experience or just have a neutral experience where they do fall back into old habits and then just sort of aren't open to trying anything else. But it sounds like you're probably in enough pain to still want to try.
Yeah, definitely. So over the years, I grew up in I had a lovely family, lovely grandparents and whatever, but my mother and father separated when I was about 5. So I grew up in quite an abusive household, and I never really had an issue with that. I was like, all right, stuff happens, you can't help that. And I was lucky that I had very loving grandparents, lovely uncles and aunts and things. So, I was supported really through that. But, over the years, everyone's like, oh, you need counselling, you need this. So I went to lots of counsellors and things. And I got sick of retelling the story. Like, it's exhausting. And I think I've lived that. I don't want to go through this again. I want something to, I want to move forward, basically. Yeah. This other, couple of days that I did a few years, I actually did it when I was about 30, and then I had an interesting experience when I turned 40, and went back again and did the advanced course. And I was really good for a little while, but then I just went back down the slide. And but I do feel, from the minute I started listening to your podcast, I thought your strategies and your advice and everything, they're just so good, and they work. And it is that consistency of always looking after your mental health,
This is a real ego-feeding podcast for me, Nick. I've been called clever. I've been called intelligent. The podcast is great.
I was waiting for it. I was waiting for it. I could see the head swelling.
I may take up the whole screen in a minute. I think we need to address these things in the past that have happened to us if we're still holding on to certain emotions and stories around them. But by going back and telling our story over and over again, we're actually just embedding that neural network into the brain. So a lot of the times it can actually be counterproductive to what we're trying to do, because it's like, yes, let's deal with what needs to be dealt with, but now we need to start looking at the tools and everything moving forward to build the life that we want to live. Because like I said, otherwise, if I'm telling the same story over and over again, I hear it so much from clients as well, where they're like, I go and speak to someone, but I could basically just be speaking to a friend, except I'm paying $150 instead of going over coffee with a friend and just venting, you know?
Yeah. So yeah, it's I'll rub your ego a bit more.
Please do.
So Nick gives all this, I was listening to Ram Dass, and I was listening to Don Miguel Ruiz, and reading books and all this stuff, and it was all fantastic. But I have to say, the podcast is the best resource for me. I find that really. No, it's so
I need to be brought down a peg. I need Melissa to come downstairs and tell me I've done something wrong. I need to deflate the ego.
It's so relatable. And everybody is the same, really, at the end of the day. We all have our anxieties. A lot of people don't admit to that, but we do. And it's so funny now. I look at people, I think, there's their anxiety screaming out there.
Yeah, well, there's this wonderful like a meme. I remember I've probably still got it on my phone, but I found it years ago, and it's like a bunch of people, and there's like a thought bubble, but they've all got, it's the same thought, and it's like everyone's got their shit together, but I don't know what the hell's going on, but they're all thinking the same thing. And it's like, once you start to do this work, you realize no one's got it all figured out. Everyone's sort of got these old patterns and wounds they're playing out, and you start to see more clearly.
Yeah, absolutely.
I posted a Instagram post last year, I think. I think it's been one of the most popular ones, and it was just simply, it's okay, everyone, none of us have any idea what we're doing. And you could hear the relief coming through from so many people. And people look at us, Hass, and I make sure clients don't start comparing themselves to me, because obviously been doing this a lot longer than them, but I'm also ignorant, incompetent, and mediocre, and so are you, Hass. So that's one for your ego.
Thank you for that.
You're welcome. And but I think that what comes through from so many clients is that relatability is what makes this so accessible and what makes this so easy to sit with. And we're not talking psychobabble or jargon or anything. It's just, this is what's going on. Can you see that? Can you understand it? Great. This is how to change it. Now just get to work and start doing that.
Yeah, because a lot of
you found it, Kristie?
Go, Kristie. You go first.
I was going to say, what else came out of this for me? Everybody has their stuff with their partner. The same thing that you argue over all the time. But I think from this, I've calmed right down, but my husband has too. But I think back now, and I wasn't allowing him to have his own anxieties or his own stuff. And I really see that a lot more clearly now, and I have to say our relationship is so much calmer. And I actually think it was me, not him now.
That's so beautiful.
Well, a relationship's a co-creation, but it's interesting when we come at it from, when our communication is delivered from a non-heightened, compassionate, constructive energy. It has such a different ripple effect, because we're not making it about us or the ego, or I don't have to win this argument or anything. It's not a competitive, destructive, ego-based. We're not really rigid. We can actually sit and listen. And I had a client, shout out to Tom over in the UK, the other day, to say the most wonderful thing. He said, my partner said the other night, I always feel skint. And so for those of you that are listening around the world, skint is a UK word for feel broke or don't have any money. And he said she said that a lot in the last couple of months, but I'd never really heard it. And it took me back to something that happened in high school. A teacher said to me, Nick, you're not listening. And I said, I am listening, I'm just not hearing you. And I think he was doing exactly the same thing. And we're all so guilty of it, because we're in our heads waiting. We're not actively listening very much. We're waiting to speak. But every time he heard her say, I feel really skint all the time, his ego popped up and made it about him. And then he stepped out of the reality of what is, that she just felt broke. And then I started applying this meaning through using these distortions and making it about him. And he's like, oh, so I'm not good enough. I'm not supportive enough. I don't make enough money. I'm not working hard enough. And so he'd go and flog himself at work and do overtime and all this stuff. And he said, I actually heard it, because we stripped his ego a couple of sessions ago. It was a ripper session. And he came back and he said, when she said, I feel skint, he goes, the most amazing thing happened. I just heard her, And I heard her just saying, "Oh, this is how I feel," and I didn't have to do anything with that. I didn't need to do anything with it. It wasn't about me. It was just her expressing how she was feeling. I didn't have to fix anything. I didn't have to do anything. And he said they had this 3 hour conversation after that where they just spoke and were in this really beautiful space where they listened and learned, and yeah, but all came from getting rid of that.
It sounds like they were able to connect, because it's this human thing. Like we need to fix. It's a very masculine energy. It's like problem fix, problem fix, problem fix. When it's like, when someone's just expressing how they feel, there's no fixing to be done there. And I love what you said, Kristie, about the sort of relationship dynamic changing, because every relationship, and it doesn't have to be romantic relationship, it can be, friendships or anything like that. There's a dynamic or there's an energy, basically. Yeah. And so when we start to work on ourselves, that actually changes the dynamic or the energy of that relationship. Like there's an energy between us three right now. And our romantic relationships are kind of the biggest magnifying glass, because that's where most of our baggage gets brought up. And we see it time and time again, that when we start to notice things within ourselves and change our energy, it will also change the energy of our partner or these relationships. And I've said this on the podcast before, but the amount of, especially guys I've worked with who, will come in and say, my wife's the source of all my problems. She's this, she's that, she's ruining my life. For God's sake, I just need to get rid of her. And then we do some work around normally a mother wound around. And then the next week I'll come in and I'll be like, oh, how's things at home? And they'll say, mate, you wouldn't believe it. My wife's completely changed. She's acting differently. She's talking differently. I'm like, she isn't doing shit differently. You've changed your energy. So the dynamic has changed, and that's so important for people to understand.
He's changed his beliefs around her. Beliefs create the perception. Perception creates the reality. So, we've spoken about it again, has heaps through the episodes, that it's funny how when you come out of doing the bulk of the work, that initial work, everything seems to have changed, but nothing's changed. It's all still the same, but you've changed, and you're looking at it through a different lens or filter. You're experiencing the stimulus through a completely different filter as well. So, it's a really interesting.
Yeah. Well,
let's to get through.
It's a different framework. It's like let me work in here as opposed to out here. Because what most people are doing is trying to change people and circumstances to make them feel okay, when it's like, why don't I just try and make myself feel okay first? Because then everything else becomes okay. So, Kristie, I'd love to talk about the work outside of sessions, because obviously, in a session, I'm sure with Nick, you're going through all of these different cognitive distortions and changing your perceptions and all that kind of stuff. But it's so important for people to understand that there is this work outside of sessions to be done if we want to really get to the place that we want to get. So what are some of the things that you're sort of putting into your day-to-day life in regards to your mental health?
So meditation, that's been a really big one. After the first couple of sessions, I said to Nick, my goodness, I said, I'm a nurse. And I said, who would have thought oxygen would be so helpful to your health? Because I'd start breathing, I'd be off to sleep. Like 4 breaths I'd get to or something. And I've actually been doing it the last few nights because I wasn't quite expecting Nick to book me in so soon to speak with you. And I thought, he said to me, when are you free on Friday? I said, this week, He goes, good. I thought he was wanting to change an appointment. Anyway, so I have been a bit wakeful, but it works.
So you're doing the meditation at night time?
Sometimes, no, all through the day. So I don't do a big meditation session, but I'll sit. If I'm starting to get a bit wound up about things, I'll go and just sit in the garden, or I'll sit and I've got sort of some vegetables and things down the side. I'll just sit out there and
beautiful.
Just take 5 or 10 minutes just to, just breathe and just listen to nature. I suppose.
Kristie's really been proactive in doing the mental reps too, haven't you?
Yeah. So I listen to I listen to you guys, but I also do a lot of reading around it, even just Instagram. So I've got like Don Miguel Ruiz. So I'll flick, if I'm feeling a bit with things, I'll flick through that like a magazine, and just, sometimes you just see one little message and you go, yeah, that's right, and it puts you back on track.
I don't know if you saw this on, I follow Don Miguel as well, but he, has the ability to put things in such simple terms. But I posted one the other week and I said to my phone, and it was just simply, you are the force that opens the rose. And I was just like, oh my God, Don, thank you. I felt good for the rest of the day after reading that.
How did you interpret that one, Has? What did that mean to you at the time?
Well, so it's my, I suppose, spiritual view that, I have this body and this mind and, I'm made up of all these chemicals and everything, but there's something that animates this body and gives it life. If you've ever seen a dead body, it looks like a human, but something's gone. It's like that's what they say. Like when someone dies, he or she is gone. So what part of them's gone? Because they look the same. And then you can go down different paths and call it spirit, soul, whatever it is. I just see it as energy. So there's an animating force that's animating all of our bodies right now. And I have a very strong belief, the same as Don Miguel, that energy that's animating our bodies is also, it's just life. It's what grows a tree. It's what sprouts an acorn into an oak tree. Or in this version, it's the force that opens a beautiful rose. So just realizing that just where life doing itself. And once again, that gets us out of our ego and taking things personally.
Yeah.
It's interesting when you read something as simple as the Four Agreements, and clients love it because of how simple it is. And it's an easy read. It's a lovely intro to this path, I suppose. But I like to read it once a year or so, and it's exactly the same words, but you can read it as a completely different book based on how you're feeling at the time or what's going on. So, any of these memes or posts on Instagram or books or whatever, we're interpreting it completely differently based on what we need at the time. So you could have skipped over that and just it wouldn't have resonated with you at all, Huss, because that part of you or that energy within you wasn't seeking it. But when you ding, yeah, that's cool.
Yeah, because it's going through we're different. Our filters are different, and like to use the extreme, like I always say, like back when I was a drug addict, if you started talking to me about this stuff, I'd be like, what the fuck are you talking about? And I'd tell you to bugger off, whereas now I devour this stuff in books and everything. So, we're always different, so timing is so critical with this stuff as well. And I think that comes down to grace at the end of the day, So to tell us about these mental reps, Kristie, how are we employing those?
Well, so the meditation I do, as I was saying, I do a lot of reading, but also I've talked to Nick a lot about, I think I've always been a bit of a people pleaser. I've tried to fix everybody and everything and just stop doing that. And I've put boundaries down as well. I think that's against my, grain completely.
Your programming.
Yeah, it really was. I remember Nick saying to me, you've got to get tough. You've got to use the same strategies, the same language that, these different situations needed, I suppose. And yeah,
sometimes we need to work in other people's models, not from our model. So we need to teach in a way that people learn, not in a way that we teach. So yeah, so if we're trying to communicate something and the person's not getting it, it's not landing, we have to look at how am I framing it for them, and how am I delivering it? And their model's completely different to my model. I've got to use their model to get this through to them.
Something else too, like I think I've always lived in fear, and Nick was very much, you write this down, he goes, you need to live in trust, trust that these people love you, and trust, that everything's going to be okay, the world's not going to come to an end, kind of thing. That was a big one because I constantly needed reminding of that. So I'd have the book open in front of me and just, stick with what I thought was, the right thing to do. Or yeah.
I love that. And how was
Kristie's come a long? Sorry, Kristie's come such a long way from where she was, and that anxiety driving so much of her behaviour and so much of how she felt and what she was thinking and everything. So. Once again, she's a wonderful example of when you do the work and put so much time and effort into yourself, then all the other sort of components of your work start, experience them a bit differently. But the mental reps that we're talking about with Kristie was just teaching her to be aware. The first step to change is awareness, but in terms of her mental rep, it's just catching yourself. So she started learning how to catch her thoughts or catch her feelings. So catching herself in a distortion or in a disturbance. Oh, I'm in suffering, or oh, I'm using should, or oh, I'm taking this personally. So that having that awareness gave her the capacity to sort of suddenly stop. And then she'd have a laugh at how irrational she was being because she wanted the whole universe to operate around her, or she wanted other people to be different to how they were, or whatever the case may be.
You take
So yeah, so she'd have a laugh, and then she'd pull herself back, into neutral instead of out of that destructive space and into that neutral. Just started to observe the reality of what is again. What's really happening here? Okay, cool. It doesn't mean anything. It's just I'm observing it objectively. Right? How do I want to feel? What's the best course of action to take from here? So then she could change into constructive thinking, be more solution oriented. Let go of her attachments that were creating her suffering, and in turn liberate her mind from those distortions and come back down from that heightened space and just move forward again with that compassion and empathy and stop making it about her, and make it about the other people. So doing seeing Kristie for the first time, it was like someone who come into the gym who'd never done a bicep curl basically, and there was this expectation that I should be able to lift all these weights, and I should be able to have happy, healthy relationships, and I should be feeling good all the time. And like, yeah, but you've never exercised this part of you that creates that. Oh, okay. So we started her off with very light, half-kilo dumbbells mentally, and gradually she's been working her way up. So that's how we frame it in terms of looking at it through the physical health perspective for the mental health.
Something else I found really helpful, Ryan, was you talking about your drug addiction, because one of my siblings, since he was a teenager, has had, quite a big problem with addiction. And while I had compassion for him, and I do have compassion for him, I was really angry as well because, he, took a lot of money off my dad, and my dad's disabled. He's in a nursing home now. He's quite young. He was hit by a car when he was 18. So I had compassion, but I had anger. But I just went straight into full compassion after I listened to, I think it was I can't remember what episode, but you were talking to your mum, and she's going through your bills going, why didn't you pay your bills? And you just, you're going, because I just they weren't even on my radar. And I just think, there was nothing malicious. I now see that there was no intent on my brother's behalf. He just had this mission to get drugs, and and I think that's so freeing to just finally be at that space, because it's such a relief actually to be.
Well, it's a relief for you because I get to be compassionate and not angry anymore. And then there's always a reason why people do things, and it's generally not to hurt other people unless they're really, really hurting themselves inside. And then if we realize they're hurting inside, then we can go into compassion. And I remember that conversation with my mum. There was like
I remember that episode.
a set of letters that high of like speeding fines, red light fines, this and that, and she's like, weren't you thinking about this?
Why aren't you adulting?
I'm like, Mum, I was, what was it? My whole day was buying, using, and selling drugs, and I was working out, how I could create this new device that I could smoke ice through better and all this kind of stuff. And I was like, I wasn't worrying about my speeding tickets. I remember I'd see the flash going to do a drug deal. I'm like, there's another one, whatever. So, it's like you said, it's not on your radar. We all live by a set of values, and when we're in addiction, those values are drugs and everything else is out the window. But, like I've spoken about on episodes before, we all carry guilt and shame for the things that we do in that state, even though at the time the action seems selfish. So, compassion.
Until we forgive ourselves or understand what was going on. So
it's like when we come out of the haze, and this is where a lot of people get in trouble, and we cover this in a Families of Addiction course, because say someone comes out of an addiction, then all of a sudden you sort of see the reality of what's happened during your addiction. You're kind of in this haze.
Destruction.
There's all these money issues. You see how much you've hurt your family. You see what you've done with your relationships and that kind of thing. And then all of a sudden that brings up all this guilt and shame. But then, that leads people to go back and use again a lot of the time, because it's very hard to face that reality. I was lucky enough to have a very compassionate mother who's like, all right, she asked that question, but then she's like, all right, let's try and get this stuff sorted and get this stuff paid off, you know. So I was able to let that go. Kristie, question I have for you is, you spoke about being, you know, a people pleaser. And a lot of people will resonate with this. So the way that obviously that looks on the other side of the coin is setting healthy boundaries and also being able to say no from an empowered position. And I'd really like to know what your experience of that was when you first started doing that, because like you said, that goes against your programming.
Yeah, no, that was really, really hard because, okay, so I was at a point when I was about 40 that there was some stuff going on with my brother. My mother was really angry with me because I was flagging it. And anyway, and there's a long history there. I won't, bash that. I don't want to bash them. That, they've got their own stuff. But there were problems. And I said to Mum, I booked in to go and see a psychologist, actually. I said, we can't change the past, but we've got to move forward. We can't keep having this. So, and I didn't, my brother was still using and whatever at that point. So I didn't take him with us. I thought, hopefully he'll be, I think. But my mum walked out. She's like, no, you're the one with the problem. We haven't got a problem. See you later. And that's what put me into such a deep pit. I just thought, so I always chased this utopian family. I thought it was out there. Silly me. But it just, what was the question again?
The question was around when you first started, saying no or setting boundaries, because it's very interesting to me, because there was a study done years ago, and it was, it was actually to do with our values as men and women and how they change. It was actually how they change after a spiritual experience, but you can even talk about it after going through working on yourself. But with women, initially, and this is very cultural thing, with their list of values, there was all these things like, being, a good mum or family or blah, blah, blah. But me as a human wasn't even on the list, or it was very, very low on the list. And I think this is where we fall into the people pleasing. So yeah, just your experience of, being able to say no and set those healthy boundaries.
Yeah, that's really only something that's come recently. And I kind of didn't even notice it happening, actually. I actually had a call from my brother, and he's, he wanted to sort things out, but there's really a lot of stuff. And I said, look, I'll think about it, but I need to think about it, And, I said, I'm really wanting to have a great life, and it sounds like things are back on track, but I said, I don't think it's the right thing for me or my family. But, there was really a lot that went on.
Yeah.
Anyway, that was so hard to do, but I thought it was really the right thing for me,
Yep.
And Nick was, had the courage to be disliked. I thought, it is. I've never put boundaries around people. I've always gone, we'll fix it. Don't worry. We'll, trying to, have this Brady Bunch family and whatever, which just doesn't exist really.
We spoke about the philosophy that those who get upset when you set boundaries were those that were benefiting from you having none to begin with. Yeah. So if you set a boundary and someone has a problem with it, then that's on them. It's got nothing to do with you. It's and as you were alluding to earlier, Hass, in that survey, it's so often when we're doing a discovery session, we go through people's priorities. Women predominantly will, we're talking about work, family, friends, hobbies, and the self, and they'll sit there. So they'll have all these options to choose and to put them in order. And I'll go family, work, friends, hobbies. And I'm like, okay, so you've put 4 on there. That's good. And how many options were there? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 options. And then it dawns on them, like, oh, and I'm like, yay, you're an afterthought. Congratulations. So if you're not even prioritizing you collectively are your mental health, your physical health, your nutritional health. Let's sort of score those components out of 10, and usually it comes in between about 10 or 20, between 10 and 15 out of 30. So they're not even operating sort of half their capacity, but they have these expectations that I should be a great mother, I should be a great role model, I should be a wonderful nurse, I should be having really healthy relationships with my family and friends, and I should have time for my hobbies and everything. but
Yeah.
they're not prioritizing the one thing that all those elements have in common, which is you.
Yeah. And that's something that you highlighted to me. It's about having healthy relationships with people, not ones where I'm just trying to please them all the time and, keep everybody happy and whatever.
Well, you keep giving your power away. If you keep pleasing people, you keep operating on their terms all the time, and you keep walking on eggshells, and it's such a disempowering way of existing. It's just, oh, well, if I do this, then that's going to happen. And my marriage was sort of similar to that. I had to walk on eggshells a lot, and
we build resentment in the system, and even if not consciously, but it starts to like stew in here because all of a sudden we're trying to give to everyone else. We're giving to work, our partner, our friends, and all this kind of stuff. And so this resentment cup just starts to fill up more and more. And there's nothing worse for our mental health than a lot of resentment in the system. Resentment, Gabor Mate calls it soul suicide.
There's nothing worse for a relationship than resentment. Resentment's like a cancer for a relationship. It's like rust in a car. It just, once it's in there, it's very hard to get out.
Yes.
Yeah, definitely. And for me, I was always a very good historian, so I could remember every rotten thing that anyone ever did to me. And I don't do that.
I remember you saying that.
Yeah. Oh man, I was the best historian ever in the world, and
But you were proud of it too. I remember that it was like the second session, and she was like, "Oh," and if someone does something to me, that goes straight in the memory bank, and I'm like, "Well, what's a cognitive distortion?" It's like disqualifying the positives. So she was just banking up all of these negatives, and you filing them away as ammunition for later.
Yeah. So I'm so happy that that's gone because I really haven't had thoughts like that. I can't I kind of don't remember when this switch happened, but it's been for a couple of months now. I think the last few sessions I thought, it's such a relief just to be really free of that stuff.
Yeah, because it weighs a lot. You got to carry it around. It's like you got that putting it in the back pocket, all of the bad things that people do. And that's the thing we do. We get proud of it. We're like, oh no, I've got it in the back pocket there if ever I need to bring it out. But it's just so freeing to let that stuff go.
It is definitely.
Actually, it's creating anger. It's creating anger and anxiety. But you can hear, the source of all suffering, anger and anxiety and whatnot, is attachment. So you can hear how attached she was to things from the past, and that you can hear the underlying expectation that shouldn't have happened, or they should have been different. They should have, you can hear the distorted attachment there. So when she says it's good to be free of these things, it's a very literal expression that I'm free of attachment, and as a result, I'm now free of these distortions. I'm free to actually exist in the here and now, instead of my memory sort of being triggered and dragging me back into the past, back 8 years ago, and then all of a sudden I'm no longer present to choose, make decisions in this moment. I'm running circles back there and ingraining how bad it all was, and just reinforcing that belief that this is a terrible person.
So true. Just another resource for people, Kristie. You literally said the words before, the courage to be disliked. There's a book called that, The Courage to be Disliked. I can't remember the author now, but for listeners, that's a great book. It's really, really good. Have you read that one, Nick?
I haven't, no.
Yeah. So it's a resource for people, the courage to be disliked. So where are things at now, Kristie? What's sort of happening in life at the minute with your mental health, and you're just sort of on this path of doing the work and seeing Nick and that kind of thing? Where are we going?
We're in I think I'm in the last semester or last couple of months. I can't even remember.
Last term.
No, you're in term 3, so you're monthly at the moment, and the last term we go out to 6 weekly. So
do people get holidays or detention with this, Nick, or how does it work?
Oh no, there's push-ups involved. There's detention. But Kristie's actually just getting out of her comfort zone a little bit more lately, and changing, jobs, or still the same industry, but changing her position, and really making some big changes out there because of all the shifts that have happened internally. So how's that for you, Kristie?
Yeah, it's good. It's been a huge learning curve, actually. So my new job's not nursing. It's a nursing role, but I'm not physically nursing. It's a lot of IT, which I am, in the past I've been terrified of. But even today, I've never sat in a Zoom meeting. They called it something else, my interview, but I'm thinking, oh, where's Angus? I thought I need my IT consultant. And I thought, no, I can do this. Just read what it says. So I downloaded the Zoom thing and whatever. I didn't even really know what a download was about 6 months ago. So, yeah. So that's
can you hear this sense of living in trust, Hass?
Yeah.
She's not going. Yeah, she's not going outside. She's sort of leaning into herself here.
Yeah, well, the words are, I can do this. I don't know how. I don't know how at the minute, but I can do this. Whereas most people are, I don't know how to do this. I can't do this.
Yeah. Well, that when I applied for this job, I looked at the position. I thought, I'm not qualified to do this. I thought, oh, I'll just have a go. And I did get my son to help me with the application because I didn't know how to attach files or any of that stuff. Anyway, they emailed me back and said, we can't open your file. We can't open the attachments. Can you please resend it through my Monash Health website? And I went, yeah, sure.
Did you say I'm practicing non-attachments?
Yeah. Thanks, dad jokes. Anyway, so I had to do it myself because there was no one around and I had to have this in. It was the deadline. And I'm going, oh, God. Honestly, anyway, I did it. I managed to upload it into the Monash Health website. I sent off an application. It was like I'd won Tats Lotto. I was like, yes. Honestly, it's one of the biggest buzzes I've had for really a long time. I was just like, yeah, this is, I can do.
It opens you up because once you do it, then you go, what else can I do? That I've been putting limitations on myself. And by the way, Nick, that's your best joke so far on the show. That was
a class A dad joke.
I think you may have peaked. I don't know if you're ever going to get. I think this is your crowning moment.
I'm retiring from dad jokes.
I lolled over here.
I know. It was an extensive lull from you.
I had to try and hold it back a little bit.
Yeah.
I was good. If I didn't have headphones on, I may have ruffled.
It was like when we played golf and played so well I didn't play for a year afterwards. I just hung up the clubs. But for the listeners, when Kristie said it gave us such a buzz, that buzz was a sense of empowerment. That was such an ingraining moment, and it was the constructive thinking, the I can mentality instead of the I can't. And the more we do that, the more it builds those really important internal foundations like self-worth, self-respect, self-love, self-discipline, but also self-belief. So getting out of our comfort zone and, right, I don't know how to do it, but I'm going to give it a crack. I'm going to trust that I'll figure it out. And then when I achieve it, yes, I can do it. I did it. Awesome. What's the next thing? And you start getting momentum down that stream instead of getting momentum down the not so nice stream. So
and you're getting new neurological pathways. You're getting dopamine flooding the brain, and this is the kind of thing that people start to use alcohol or drugs or that kind of thing to get, and you can just get it by challenging ourselves and realizing that we have a lot more capacity than we thought we did in the past.
Yeah,
I'm doing it with my motorbike at the moment. I bought a new bike, and I'm really just trying to get on the wrenches, get the spanner out and do this and do that instead of relying on a mechanic to do it. I know it's going to take me a lot longer than it would take a mechanic. But, and it's not for major things, but it's like, all right, I'm going to give it a crack first. And when you sort of do it, you got a few cuts and bruises and, bit of this, bit of that going, but you're like, you stand back, you're like, look what I did. I'm just going to marinate in this dopamine for a little bit.
Yeah, you also value it more. There's this wonderful story I heard of, there was a guy and he was a self-made multimillionaire. So he'd come from nothing and obviously built this amazing business or whatever he did, and he had his daughter, and so she was obviously born into wealth, but because he came from nothing, he's like, I want her to value things like, and it was her 16th birthday or whatever, and it's a thing in the States, you buy your son or daughter a car when they turn 16, and so she wanted this fancy car or whatever, and he's like, all right, I'm going to buy it for her. But what he did, he bought it and he hired a mechanic to come and I think I've told this, Nick, have I? You're nodding as I was saying.
Yeah.
And anyway, they disassembled the entire car. So on her birthday, they opened the garage door and say, "Happy birthday, honey." And there's a car literally in parts, right? But it's the car she wanted. And so he hired this mechanic, and over the next couple of months, the daughter and the mechanic rebuilt the car together. Right.
Yeah.
And he was saying that she'd had that car for however long, it never got a scratch on it. She looked after it perfectly because she valued it so much. Whereas if you just bought her the car, she'd be like, "Oh, cool, free car off dad," and probably treat it like crap.
I've got a
There's
similar
so much value in that.
Yeah. Similar story to that. I remember our daughter turned 18 and she bought my old car off us. And she said to me at the time, "Mum, all my friends from Brighton, their mum and dad buy them a brand new car. All my Hampton friends, they get their parents' secondhand car and I've got to buy mine." And I said, "But you're going to appreciate that more." I said, "You've done it yourself, blah, blah, blah." Anyway, she recently bought her own unit. She saved up, bought her own unit. And quite a few of her friends were getting money given to them and, buying properties and stuff. She's nearly 25, our daughter. And anyway, she said to me one day, "You're right, Mum. Remember you said about the car?" She said, "I know I've done this myself." She said, "And there's so much more satisfaction out of that than, yeah." But no,
that's beautiful, positive programming, and it's like what you teach, Nick. Like it's harder in the moment because there's a lot of resistance in the moment, but it does pay off later on. That's why so many lottery winners end up very, very unhappy people. There was a study done that people who become paraplegics or quadriplegics end up being happier than people who win the lottery, right? Because,
totally.
I got all this.
When you and Mel come home, you're making Tommy swim back, or
maybe row a boat.
Okay,
that's probably the only way we're going to get home at the minute, to be honest. We're coming on a boat.
Imagine how buff he'd be by the time he got home, and he'd be like 3 years old with just these Popeye arms, and
I'm just feeding him spinach from while I'm kicking back.
Oh, all right. Well, I think we're at the end of this episode.
Let's
it's been an hour already.
I know, that's flown by, hasn't it? Bloody hell, it goes so fast.
Yeah.
Kristie, what advice do you have for people who are maybe they have tried things in the past, maybe they haven't, but maybe they're like, "Hey, I've got these negative thought patterns or these behaviors that keep showing up in my life and I'm kind of on the fence of reaching out for help." Like, what advice do you have for them based on your journey?
Just do this because it is such a good tool. It's why I kind of manipulated my son into doing the course, because I thought it's just such a great tool for life, and maybe he hasn't done anything else since, then, but hopefully he remembers this and he'll go back to it if, ever the
Nick is a great tool.
You threw your son in here under the guise of it would help his golf. So you're very clever mothering there. It was golf's important to him. If he goes and gets his mental health in shape and trains his mind, it'll help him become a better golfer. And he was great to work with.
Yeah. That's we've spoken about values a lot on the show, but it's so important to understand that every human being lives by a hierarchy of values, and they're all different. It's like a personal fingerprint. And if we can start to speak to people in their values, we can communicate, a lot better. Like Mel, my partner Mel, just loves business and all that kind of stuff. So if I can explain how me going to play golf or something like that is going to be good for our business, then she's like, "Oh, go for it, babe, no problem." But if I'm just like, "I want to go and play golf," she's like, "No, you're not going to go for 4 hours,
But that's what I mean before, is we got to work in other people's models. Yeah.
Yes.
So it's exactly the same thing.
I think the other important thing too is it's got to come from yourself. You can only fix yourself. Nobody else can do that for you. And I think, that's where the work's really important, because, it took me ages. I'd go into Nick and say, "Oh, I understand everything you're saying, but I'm falling off the wagon quite often, And then all of a sudden, you keep absorbing this stuff every day. You're reading and you're catching yourself,
mental reps,
and you're doing the mental reps, and eventually it does stick. Like it really does. And I think it's so important. Like, it's such a good tool. I think you can't just go and sit and talk about your problems or whatever and expect them to go away. That's, you're not going to there's nothing proactive about that. And I think this is just a great thing. It's a yeah.
Yeah, to do the workhouse.
Yeah. It's like thinking about it as our diet. We've probably spoken about this before, but our diet. People get really fixated on their diet and what I'm putting in my body, and for whatever goal it is. But also everything that we take into our consciousness is our diet as well. So it's like going and seeing Nick or myself or another practitioner. That's part of our diet that we're taking in. What we're reading, what we're listening to, it's all part of our diet. And if I'm putting garbage into my brain, then my mental health's going to struggle.
That's right.
I'll send you a photo soon. I often tell clients to write all this stuff down on Post-it notes and stick it up around their bathrooms and bedrooms and house and whatnot. Just so you don't have to consciously focus on it. Yeah,
there's one.
You don't have to consciously focus on it, but even if it's just in your peripheral, you'll still subconsciously be absorbing it. So you'll be learning without even thinking about it. And I had a client send me a photo. He goes, Post-it notes weren't big enough, so I sent through these big A4 with massive textures all over it. And it's like, discomfort precedes success, and you can do it. And it's like, put these A4 sheets of paper all over his house. I'm like, oh, whatever works for you, bud.
He's going for it.
He really is. He's like, Nick, Post-it notes weren't big enough.
Oh, I love it. Kristie, thank you so much for joining us today. I've loved hearing about you and your story, and I think it's something that a lot of our listeners are going to identify with. And you're clearly someone who does the work and didn't have the expectation that you're going to get fixed like that. But it's a combination of, doing the work, seeing someone who you really resonate with, and making it a lifestyle.
Yeah. Thanks for having me.
She also, and Kristie, I think you know this as well, but she had the underlying emotional intelligence there that we could tap into, and that's what we've been sort of elevating and growing. But she had this self-awareness. She just didn't know. She didn't have the tools and resources. So, it's just, she's come and we've just tried to complement her with those things. And then, we've guided and facilitated, but she has been the one that's done all the work. So I hope she's feeling proud of herself and what she's achieved, and knows that there's a whole lifetime ahead of her of continuing doing this now. We can't rest on our laurels.
That's true. You know what it was that resonated in the podcast at first was the adult tantrum and not getting what you want. And I thought, I've been having an adult tantrum for 6 years, and I'm like, what? Sure, that's what it was.
I think a lot of people can identify with that. Yeah, it's a lot of energy, isn't it?
Yeah.
So anyway, hopefully I'm out of those terrible tantrums. So
it's not just the terrible twos.
We talk about emotionally maturing and emotionally developing and evolving. So you have. So your capacity to have those tantrums is far less than what it was at the start of this journey.
Well, you kind of don't let yourself get away with it. You might have that fleeting thought, but then you bring.
There was a nugget there, and I've lost it.
I think she was about to say that you catch yourself a lot earlier than you do. You see yourself going down the path, and you catch yourself.
You know what's happened?
What's that?
She's just become enlightened.
She has. She's back. She's back from enlightenment.
No, I thought you'd gained enlightenment, Kristie. You just disappeared.
Yeah, I thought you two had frozen. Actually, you're looking a bit. Yeah. I've got terrible internet at our house, as you know. We've had some pretty patchy.
That's okay. We've got through. So I think it's a really valuable show for lots of listeners out there. They'll take lots of takeaways for people, both who have done the work, and it'll be a reminder of their journeys, but also for people on the cusp of getting on this train. So thank you so much, Kristie, for taking an hour of your day to sit with us and share.
Thanks for having me, and thank you so much for putting that podcast out in the atmosphere, because really it's just saved me. It really, really has.
Oh, Kristie. And thanks for stroking my ego today.
I'm going to have to send Mel a message.
Oh, no.
Yeah, I'm going to have to send Mel a message saying, can you yell at Ryan for the rest of the Arvo?
It is it's a great thing to put out there. But anyway, thanks again.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for listening.
All right, guys.
We'll see you all next week. Peace out.